This video has been made with the purpose of education and awareness of real crimes, and there is no disrespect intended to anyone. This is to help promote truth and justice for anyone who has been a victim of crime. What I'm about to report is what I have researched online, and I will welcome any corrections should they be required. Hello Berry True Crime fans, welcome back. Been a while, I know I keep saying that, but I am going to be really going for it this year. I have a whole list of cases that I want to cover. I would like to aim for one a week, but it may be one a fortnight. Now, I would appreciate it very, very much if you could please let me know what cases you want me to cover. And if you do want to keep coming back to see what I do, you know, the best thing to do is subscribe and turn on the notifications so it saves you having to look for things. And if you've got a couple of minutes, please take the trouble to just click like if you like it, and if you don't have to. Make a comment if you want to, and if you can't stand the sound of my voice, don't bother watching. Bye-bye. This case has me angry, really, really angry. I cannot believe the failings in this case, and the unsolved cases really rile me up anyway. But when they are poorly handled, it just doubly riles me up. A bit like with Kendrick Johnson, that really made me angry. This is another one. Now, as angry as it makes me, there are things that have to be covered. There's exposure that has to be made for cases like this, so we know not to make this happen again and to get justice for the families. So today we're going to be talking about the case of Mitrice Richardson. Mitrice Lavon Richardson, born on April 30th, 1985, was found dead by park rangers in a creek bed in Malibu Canyon, California on the 9th of August 2010, having gone missing on September 17th, 2009. Her death to this day remains a mystery. Mitrice's parents were Mitrice Sutton and Michael Richardson, her name being an amalgamation of their Christian names, Michael and Mitrice. Mitrice remarried very shortly after splitting up from Michael. Her husband Larry Sutton therefore became Mitrice's stepfather, and he raised her as his own. And so he was kind of the father figure to her, even though Mitrice had an on-off again relationship with her father. They still were very, very close. Michael Richardson had actually spent some time in jail, but when he came out, he turned his life right around and was always there for his daughter. He described her as his, quote, heartbeat and his everything, and her mother Mitrice described her daughter Mitrice as a joy and a ball of energy. Mitrice was a very, very admirable person in many, many respects. She was someone who I believe many people would look up to and aspire to. She grew up in Covina, California, and she was exceptionally intelligent, really, really intelligent, to the point that sometimes school was not quite challenging enough for her, and she used to do things like crosswords in her spare time to keep her mind active. She was also a cheerleader, an athlete, a model, and she also partook in beauty pageants. She loved to dance as well, and when she was actually doing her postgraduate course, she worked part-time as a go-go dancer, not as a stripper, but as a go-go dancer. And there is actually a picture online with her in what looks like a cat or a bunny outfit ready for a night out. She was someone who really knew how to have a good time, but was also someone who people have described as not very outdoorsy, and she would rather stay in than go out sometimes. She obtained a BA in psychology from California State University with a 4.0 GPA. So she was really going places. She had so much going for her. She had decided that she wished to specialize in child psychology. Her professors were very, very impressed with her. At the time of her death, she was 24 years old and attending grad school. The sky was the limit with her. She would have earned her PhD. She would have become a doctor of psychology, and with everything all this behind her and being the nice, kind person, yet very vivacious and also quite down to earth that she was, she had unlimited potential. She'd already achieved a lot in her short life anyway, but she really was an amazing person. Her mother and stepfather have described Mitrice as well as being not just someone who wasn't outdoorsy. She wasn't into hiking, she wasn't into long walks, and she particularly didn't like being outside at night, especially not on her own. Mitrice came out to her parents as gay 3 years before she died. Her family were extremely accepting of her. Shortly after, she started seeing a young lady called Tessa Moon, and they were together for approximately 2 years, but they split up sometime in around 2009, and Mitrice started seeing a woman called Vanessa. When Mitrice decided to go to grad school, she had to have somewhere to live. Her great-grandmother Mildred, who was in her 90s, was living on her own and she needed someone there to help take care of her. It was basically a no-brainer. Mitrice was going to move in with her great-grandmother, look after her great-grandmother, as well as save money while she was going to grad school, because it was right near where she needed to go to school. She of course still had, her mum nearby and her stepfather nearby. Mitrice was also interning at a clinical psychology office, so everything was going well. Her parents were incredibly proud, and her great-grandmother too. But leading up to her disappearance, just a few months leading up to her disappearance, her behaviour started to change. It became rather inexplicable and rather odd. One of her college professors says that the changes to Mitrice's behaviour were very subtle at first. Like, she would say very strange things but then explain them away. She would text or email random things, which was not like her, but she would always explain it. She'd have an answer for it. She would leave odd voicemails, not answer people's calls when she always would, and not even return them, which was very much unlike Mitrice. Some of the sources that I have read say that she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, although it wasn't clear exactly when that was. Other sources say it was posthumous, so after she died, it was speculated she may have had bipolar, or it was speculated just before she disappeared, and maybe she thought that herself or other people thought that. But the sources have not been completely clear in this. And Tessa Moon, who was Mitrice's girlfriend for 2 years, said that Mitrice had no mental health conditions. Now, I don't know if they still continue to have contact after they broke up, but they did break up several months before Mitrice disappeared, and it was that time that her behaviour started to become odd. Mitrice would leave very strange posts on social media now, but she would ask random questions and make statements that sounded very, very strange, or people just couldn't discern what her behaviour was. This all came to a head on September 16th, 2009, when Mitrice drove to Malibu Beach to a restaurant called Joffrey's. Now, this restaurant was pretty upmarket. It was very, 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 very posh, very, very swanky. And as she drove in there, it turned out to be valet parking only. So a valet parking is when you give your keys to a chauffeur and they park your car for you, and then when you go to leave, they bring the car to the front, then they give you your keys and then you go away. The valet had asked Mitrice to wait in her car while he parked somebody else's car. While he was doing that, Mitrice got out of her car and she actually got into the valet's personal car. Now, how she knew that was his, I don't know. And how she got into it, I don't know. The valet saw her, and of course he was immediately like, "What are you doing in my car?" But he wanted to know if she was okay. She was going through his glove compartment and through his CDs. And something she said seemed very, very strange. She was talking about the language of numbers, which was something she mentioned several times that night. And then he asked her again if she's okay. And her words to him were, "It's subliminal." And then she said she wished to avenge the death of Michael Jackson, which had occurred about 2 months before that. Even though afterwards she pretty much immediately said she was kidding. She said some other strange things that were very, very incomprehensible to the valet. The valet didn't think it was so strange that she should be refused admittance to the restaurant, because somebody acting a bit odd and not doing anything exactly criminal, even though going into somebody else's car and rifling through their stuff is actually, well, I'd say bordering on trespassing, if not actually trespassing, they still allowed her access to the restaurant. She was there alone, she wasn't due to meet any friends or anything, and she didn't know anybody there. But for some reason, after ordering her steak and cocktail, she decided to just randomly go to some people's table and just sit with them. They didn't know her, but they were polite and they allowed her to sit with them. She would actually start to ramble in incoherent sentences or appear to be speaking in different tongues. Very, very strange, and again mentioning the language of numbers. Another thing that Mitrice said, which is very, very well known in this case, is when they asked her where she was from, she said she was from Mars. Many people probably thought that she was probably joking or wasn't being serious, but her behaviour the whole night was very strange, and the employees of Joffrey's restaurant picked up on that. They were very concerned about her behaviour. Not that they felt that she was threatening or being a problem. It's just that it seemed like she needed a bit of help. Some other sources say that it was here that she said she wished to avenge the death of Michael Jackson, or she might have just repeated it at this point. Again, she wasn't acting in a threatening manner. It was unusual, but it wasn't causing anyone to be uncomfortable, so the restaurant staff, again, didn't ask her to leave. Her bill came to, I think, a little over $89. When it came to paying, Mitrice just started to walk out of the restaurant. The staff stopped her and said, "Are you not going to pay for your bill?" Mitrice told them that the people that she was sitting with had paid it. They said, "No, they haven't. You need to pay your bill." But Mitrice had literally no cash, and she even opened up her bag to say that she had no purse, she had no cash. It's not clear if Mitrice refused to pay, because she could have said that she'll pay at another time or see if she had some money in her car. The restaurant then asked if there was anyone that could pay on her behalf, and Mitrice said that she could give them the number of her great-grandmother, because that was the only number she remembered off the top of her head. She didn't have her phone with her, and if you're like me, the phone numbers on your phone, you don't commit them to memory, you commit them to the phone memory. You don't remember them off the top of your head unless it's your own phone number or one that you would manually dial very, very regularly. Even my own phone number, I have to sometimes think, what is it? So they phoned her great-grandmother Mildred. Now again, Mildred was in her 90s. You know, it was a bit too much to ask of her, but Mildred offered to pay for it using a card. But even though card details could be given over the phone, they needed Mildred's signature to be able to verify it. Now, there's a couple of ways that could have been done. The signature could have been faxed, but Mildred didn't have a fax machine, or Mildred had to go there in person and give the signature. Now, she's in her 90s, she can't do this. Some of the employees said that they would put some of their own money together to pay for her, but then it was found that it wouldn't have been the right thing to do. There were reports of her rambling again, and when asking how she got there, she said that she followed the signs and voices. That could be taken in a way to say signs and voices could mean mental health issues, but also signs could be road signs and voices could be sat-nav. She may have had a sat-nav, so that may have been what she was saying, but it's not 100% clear. Most of her speech seemed to be in parables, metaphors, a little bit like I remember how when reading Romeo and Juliet, how Romeo and Juliet would flirt with each other in metaphors and parables and in riddles. It was the similar kind of thing. She was speaking other tongues sometimes, but when she was speaking English, nothing ever made sense. They also suspected she may have been intoxicated, she may have been high, she may have drunk more alcohol earlier that day and not just the cocktail that she ordered. Joffrey's restaurant staff were genuinely worried about Mitrice's well-being. To be honest, the bill, even though it was quite sizable, it wasn't exactly a massive fortune. They could have dealt with it a different way, but they felt for Mitrice's safety, it didn't seem that she should be on her own. So they actually did call the police. When the police arrived, they did a sobriety test and she actually passed. So besides that cocktail, I actually don't know if it was an alcoholic cocktail or not, she wasn't drunk and she wasn't high. She actually suggested to the police that she may have had her purse in the car. The police did actually check her car and found her purse was there, and in her purse was her debit card. Now again, this is where sources conflict. It's not clear if she just refused to use her debit card or if she said there wasn't enough money on her debit card, but it wasn't so much the unpaid bill that was causing the police a bit of concern here. One of them described Mitrice as, quote, a ding. Now, that sounds a bit derogatory, but what it means is it's basically police jargon or police speak for someone who doesn't appear to be in their right mind, or someone who doesn't appear to be of sound mind. They did, however, find an ounce of marijuana in her car. Now, that in itself and the unpaid bill isn't enough to get someone arrested. But given how she was behaving, the police did something called a citizen's arrest so that they could have her evaluated by a mental health professional. Mitrice was booked into the Malibu Lost Hills Sheriff Station in Calabasas, and her car was actually towed to a place which was about 20 miles away, so her car was gone. And along with it, her purse, and if she had a cell phone, it would have been in there. When she was at the station, Mitrice made around 4 phone calls, and it was discovered that due to some sort of system or technical malfunction, these calls were not actually recorded. Mitrice said that she'd called her grandmother, but Mildred actually denied receiving these calls, and when she later produced her telephone bills to show incoming calls, it actually confirmed her story that Mitrice hadn't actually phoned her. It's not clear who she phoned. Mitrice was put into a cell with another inmate, And while she was there, the CCTV showed her sometimes in cases standing in one position, swaying from side to side, at other times going to a window as opposed to the door and almost trying to force it open, which would actually take her on top of somebody's desk. But of course she couldn't force it open. The police actually deemed, or themselves, without even consulting a mental health professional, felt that Mitrice's behaviour was normal. And it turned out that Joffrey's restaurant weren't really that bothered about the unpaid bill. Legally, they couldn't actually keep her there. So just before midnight on the 16th of September, Mitrice left the station. Lettice actually phoned the police station and said to them, like, if you're gonna let her go tonight, let me know so I can come and pick her up. Or if you're gonna keep her there, let me know in the morning and then I can come and get her. However, Lettice started to talk a little bit more about the area this place was in was not familiar to Mitrice. She didn't know this area, that it was dark. Obviously, it was around midnight at this time. So she actually at that point said specifically, do not let her go. And if you are, let me know and I'll come and get her. But do not let her go. This is not safe. She has no means of getting home. She has no means of contacting anyone. She has no means of getting transport. There's of course no buses. It's late at night. But against her wishes, Mitrice was let go. What is also haunting is that what Lettice said in this phone call to the police, she believes may have foretold her daughter's fate, which we'll get onto a bit later. The officer with whom Lettice had spoken very shortly afterwards finished his shift, and he actually admitted he did not pass on Lettice's wishes to the people that were on shift after him. There is a surveillance video at the station of Mitrice entering, being booked, being in the cell because it was with glass, it was right there, and then the jailer letting her out. And that is the last time that Mitrice was actually caught on video. At 5:30 that morning, so literally only a few hours later, Lettice called the station and said, "Do you still have my daughter there?" And she was absolutely distressed and upset and angry that they had let her daughter go, even though she specifically said not to. But she didn't know that that information hadn't been communicated. The reason they gave her was that they said Mitrice seemed normal. They didn't feel the need to consult a medical health expert. And apparently the jailer had actually given Mitrice the option of staying there until the morning in the lobby. Apparently Mitrice didn't want to stay, she wanted to go, so they had no reason at all to keep her, and they legally couldn't keep her. If she was a grown adult, she could go if she wanted to. What was very concerning was there were multiple reports and multiple pieces of evidence to show that Mitrice was not in her right mind, that she was not acting in a rational way. Even the CCTV footage of her in the station shows that. The arresting officer at Joffrey's restaurant actually testified that he did not find at any point that the staff said that they were worried about Mitrice's well-being, yet it was specifically said in the recorded phone call from Joffrey's restaurant to the police that they were worried about Mitrice's well-being. And why else did they arrest her? Because the unpaid bill and even the marijuana was not enough for them to actually arrest her. And she was described as a ding as well. She was saying things like, "I'm from Mars," and rambling in different tongues, and that is not normal. This officer sent an email to a colleague a month or so later in which they did actually insinuate that they were worried about her, about how she was behaving. The police officer later said that he had no recollection whatsoever of sending that email. There is also a report that Mitrice did not meet the legal requirement for something called a Article 1 Detention of Mentally Disordered Persons for Evaluation and Treatment, 5150, or just called a 5150. And this means that someone is detained for 72 hours for mental health evaluation to determine if they are a danger to themselves, to the public, or if they need any further treatment. This is something that Mitrice's college professor, a clinical psychologist, strongly disputes, because if someone is behaving the way Mitrice was, then she does need to be evaluated. So after hearing from the police that Mitrice had been let go, Lettice started to make her way over to the police station. At around 6:30 that morning, so an hour after that phone call, a man called Bill Smith actually phoned the police station and said that there was a trespasser on his property. A young black woman, very skinny, wearing jeans and a t-shirt with what he described as afro hair, was sitting on some steps near his property, and his wife saw her They asked if she was okay, so they weren't being confrontational. And this woman said that she was resting. The description of her, not just the physical description about how she was behaving, did seem to be like this was Mitrice. It's also been widely accepted that this was Mitrice. That phone call that Bill made to the police station was recorded, but also cadaver dogs or sniffer dogs actually picked up Mitrice's scent there and tracked it along with some footprints which did match Mitrice's shoes to a certain place where it looked like she actually started to run, and then her track went cold. Physical tracks disappeared and the dogs lost her tracks. So a lot of people think that she either got into a car or was forced into a car. It seems that at the time that Letice made that phone call, Mitrice was well and alive, albeit in probably a delirious state. Now, where she was actually seen was a few miles south of the police station. Remember, this place is in a kind of, how to describe it, it's not rural, but it's not urban. There were buildings and there were businesses there, but they were all shut because it was the middle of the night. There were some houses down the road, but there were no street lights. It was a windy road. There were canyons and crevices. It's not a safe place to walk at night, and Mitrice had literally nothing on her to help her. All she had was the clothes she was wearing. She had no phone, she had no money, she had no card, she had no car. And the payphones, you know, there's no saying that she would ever find a payphone. And even if she did go to somebody's house, how can you say to somebody past midnight, you know, can I use your phone to phone somebody? The police seem to be very defensive about their actions with Mitrice. There was a massive search for her, a full-scale search around that area, but nothing was ever found of her. No physical evidence of where she went after her trail tailed off. Nothing. The Richardson and Sutton families were understandably they were livid with the police about how they treated her, and they even said that if Mitrice was a celebrity with the name of Spears or Lohan, she wouldn't have been treated that way. She would have been taken care of. They feel there was some racial bias here, and I'm not here to accuse anyone of anything, but I can believe that because we know that that does happen, and it's awful to think that anybody, whoever you are, is being treated in a dismissive, offhand way that results in harm coming to that person, and nobody seems to be doing anything about it. It's absolutely disgusting. It really is. Months and months passed, including Christmas, and there seemed to be no sightings of Mitrice or scent or any body parts, her clothes or anything around that area. So the search went nationwide, or at least the alert went nationwide. And at one point, someone at least matching Mitrice's description was spotted in Las Vegas. There were reportedly about 70 sightings of someone who looked like Mitrice in Las Vegas, and even if it was her, she may not have been using her name. Her father travelled to Las Vegas, and he says he actually saw her in one of the casinos at a distance. He called out to her, she looked at him and ran off. That seems consistent with her behaviour, that she wouldn't go to somebody who she knew she would probably run. And there were 70 sightings. Now, I've said this before on a previous video on my main channel. Everyone has a double somewhere. Sometimes I've called out to somebody because they look just like someone who I know and they're not that person. But if you yell out across the room, even if that's not your name, sometimes you look around anyway because, you know, you hear somebody yelling. But Mitrice's father says, look, hang on, I know my daughter. I know her very, very well. That definitely was my daughter. There was an appeal made in Las Vegas to say, Mitrice, if you're here, please make contact with somebody. At least let us know that you're okay. On August 9th, 2010, in a creek bed in Malibu Canyon, some skeletal remains were found, which were later found to be that of Mitrice Richardson. Her body was apparently partially mummified. Now, what that means is that even though quite a lot of her body was skeletal, there was quite a bit of her body that was still quite well preserved. That often happens if a body is being kept in a place where decomposition does not happen at an accelerated rate, as you would expect if someone is found in a very bushy area, which is where she was found, such as if she was kept in a freezer, if she was somewhere where there was low oxygen, such as a peat bog. There's lots of bodies that have been preserved in peat bogs because there's a lack of oxygen. Her body had no clothes on it at all, but several hundred feet away in seemingly a straight line, they found her jeans, her bra and her belt. Her underwear and the 2 shirts she was wearing and her shoes and socks have never been found. There was some jewellery still found on her person as well, and her hair seemed to be intact. Her spinal cord and her head, though, was separated from her body. Now that's what Mitrice says she feels that she foretold. She appeared to half joke with the officer with whom she spoke when she said, "Don't let my daughter go." She goes, "I don't want to find that my daughter's, being beheaded somewhere." You would probably say in jest, even though technically you're very serious, you don't want any harm come to your loved one. But the fact that her skull was found separated from her body, it's not clear if that actually happened as a result of the decomposition like animals, because one of the bones in her neck has never actually been found, and that's usually the bone that would fracture if you're strangled. That would tell whether or not you've died of strangulation. Not all of her bones were found either, and when she was discovered, the coroner specifically said, "Do not move that body. I need to go there, photograph it, examine it as it is." But there were other priorities at the time, which meant that this had to wait. So the police department decided, against the coroner's wishes, to move her body. The reason they gave was because they didn't want any animals to get to it. They didn't want it to get into a worse state than when they found it. They didn't want anyone else to disturb it, even though disturbing it is moving it. But what Mitrice's father has quite rightly said, look, hold on, you could easily stay around the body and keep watch over it. You've got guns, you can keep animals away from it. Because some parts of her clothes were found relatively near her body, although a few hundred feet down the canyon, the police speculated that they were removed by water or by animals or by natural means. But it's obvious that Mitrice wasn't there the whole 11 months that she was missing. Otherwise, her body parts would have been very, very much scattered around and she would have been completely skeletal. Animals and microorganisms would have got to her a lot more than they did. But another thing is her belt was inside of her jeans, but when they were found, they were separated and the belt buckle was undone. It hadn't snapped or anything, so undoing the belt buckle and sliding it out of the jeans, and jeans don't come off easily. If anyone's ever tried to get a pair of jeans off, it's not easy to do that. And also her bra, it would have to have been unhooked, and it wasn't actually found to have been snapped or anything like that. So there was a lot of speculation that she was actually killed and her body was dumped there at some point after she went missing, but not immediately after, because there was a lot of searching around that area. She wasn't found too far from Bill Smith's house. Mitrice's cause of death has never been determined, and it's actually on her death certificate that her cause of death is undetermined. They haven't ruled whether it's homicide or accidental or by natural means, anything like that. They haven't been able to find it, partly because not all of her body was found, and not all of her clothing was found. The clothing was also not documented separately. It was put into the same body bag that her bones were kept in. They weren't separated and processed. The handling of this case has been absolutely ridiculous. When the investigating officers went back to the scene of where they found Mitrice, they found even more bones. And when Mitrice's family went there, and it's quite a bit of a job to get to that part because there's poisonous plants there. It's very, very steep. But when they were there, they found a finger bone. So they reported it to the police. They went back there and found even more bones. So even the removal of Mitrice's body was not very thorough at all. Mitrice's mother is convinced that Mitrice died by homicide, and it's quite possible that's the case. It's quite possible that she may have somehow ended up in Vegas, say for example, where her footsteps trailed off. And even the tracker expert found that the pattern and the indentation of her shoes shows that at some point after walking for a bit, she was actually running. To pick someone up in that kind of area is kind of the perfect place to do it because there are very few houses and hardly any street lamps. She may have been taken to Vegas. She may have been forced into prostitution. She may have been murdered because she either knew something or she was a liability or for some other reason. But they decided to take her back to that area and dump her in that area so it didn't look like she'd been in Las Vegas. So I'm just throwing ideas out there, but it just seems that might have been the case, or She may have died somewhere and been moved to that area, but it's very unlikely that what happened to her was a result of animal activity. Very shortly after Mitrice was found, her parents actually filed a civil lawsuit against the California State Police, and they actually won a settlement of $900,000. There were also internal investigations into the conduct of the police, but they were actually, as far as I know, they were dismissed. There was no charges brought to anybody. One thing is worth noting is that very shortly after Mitrice went missing, there was actually a mural, a graffiti mural of what appeared to be racist and somewhat sexually explicit paintings of African American women near the canyon, and it was actually painted around the time that Mitrice went missing. Some people also reported hearing screams near the canyon a few days after she went missing. Whether that was related or not, it's unclear, but it's unlikely that Mitrice was killed and left in that canyon very shortly after she went missing, because the state of her body shows that she must have been killed not long before she was found, or she was killed shortly after she went missing, or sometime around that, or she was killed shortly after she went missing, or in some time in that period, and was kept in a freezer or a deoxidized area in that time. In 2016, there was actually an investigation into the handling of the case, but it was found there was insufficient evidence to bring any charges to anybody responsible for what happened to Mitrice. It's never been found exactly what happened to Mitrice, even though her body was actually exhumed after it was buried just to see if there was any evidence they could find about what happened to her. The results were inconclusive. The place that she was actually found is an area which is not easy to get to, but it's doable, and it's usually an area that people would go, they would basically grow marijuana there. Plants had been pulled up, marijuana plants had been pulled up, and the police would often go back there at certain points to see if any more were there, and that's how Mitrice's remains were actually found. And it begs the question, when was the last time the police actually went to that area for that reason? And was there anything there? I really, really would love for this to be thoroughly investigated by the FBI. This really needs to be looked at again. Even the place where she was found, even though it's been 11, 12 years, there might still be something around that area, like even like the geology of the area that might give some clues as to what happened to her. It's really, really difficult to even make an assumption. If we assume that the sightings in Las Vegas were real, then there's a possibility that she was returned to that place, or she returned herself to that place. She may have fallen down into the creek, and that's how she ended up in the state she was in, but how come she was found naked with only 3 items of clothing there? And if they'd been removed by animals or by natural means, they probably would have still found them, but they hadn't. I personally do think there was foul play involved. I personally do. She was vulnerable. And a vulnerable person, unfortunately, is an easy target. And it's awful that this happened to someone whom I'm pretty sure her parents were incredibly proud of her and will always be proud of her. She really, really sounds like an amazing person, and her family sound absolutely amazing too. And I'm very, very sorry to them about what happened to their daughter. And I sincerely hope they get answers. Thank you so, so much for watching. I really appreciate this. Next week, I will have rather an unusual case, which is actually going to be my first not murder case. And it actually goes back 500 years. And I'll see you next week then, little berries, or in 2 weeks if I can't do it in a week. So I'll see you later. Bye-bye now.